Well, it's good to be with all of you through this very different way today as we gather for an online worship service. You know, as we look at this and try and figure out how to make things work, I'm reminded that this has been the story of the Christian church for centuries, is that things have changed, and so they've had to change and adopt with it. I know that many of you would much rather be together with your friends and your family of faith, but we appreciate you taking the time today to join us through this online experience. And we hope that all that we're doing will be meaningful for you, because we recognize that right now it's a very different time. Things are very uncertain. You may be feeling very anxious as you watch the news and you think about all that's going on. You may be trying to figure out if you're in the high-risk category or not, and how safe is it to venture out to the grocery store or to a restaurant to pick up food. You may be just feeling anxious about all the news that's coming at you, just this sheer volume of stuff that's coming to you. Or maybe in all of this, you're just trying to figure out why you don't feel God's presence. Because as people of faith, we regularly talk about how important it is to be close to God and to let God be real in our lives. And it's times like these that really seem to challenge us. We look around and we assess where we are and what's going on, and we don't necessarily feel that sense of God's presence. During all this time, I can't help but remember how the disciples felt. These were the people that were physically in God's presence in the person of Jesus Christ. They'd been out teaching with Him and seeing miracles and seeing great things happen. And then one day, as they're traveling by boat, which they often did, they find themselves in a unique situation, and the storm begins to brew around them. The winds begin to whip up. The storm begins to blow water into the boat. Things are shaking. Things are getting very unnerving. And they look over at Jesus, and He's asleep in the boat. And I'm sure there were several things that went through their minds. Obviously, one of them was, how can you sleep? Because that's what they asked Him. But there was probably another sense as well. And that is, why is there even a storm if Jesus is with us? If He is this presence, why are we caught up in a storm? And we realize that that's just part of the human condition, that even though God is there with us, we still go through these storms in life. And Jesus did get up and He calmed the storms and He calmed the seas. And He told them to be people of faith and to rely on their faith. And so the question that we look at this morning is, so what does that mean? I learned a long time ago that difficult things happen. You go through challenging times. You go through storms. I've been through actual storms of hurricanes and tornadoes. Sometimes they're emotional storms. Sometimes they're relational storms. Sometimes they're job-related storms. But we all go through those storms, and it's important that we all learn how to rely upon our faith and connect with God. And so what I want to do is take a few minutes with you now and talk to you about some very specific ways that you can connect with God during the storms. Now, I know that oftentimes people just default to the sense of, well, you just need to pray. You just need to talk to God. But what I've found, and I think what most of you have found, is that when we begin to pray, we are often more talking and thinking than we are listening. And if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who talks all the time, you know that there's not a really back and forth element to that. You're simply an audience for them versus someone who's providing and giving something to them. And I think that especially when we're stressed and when we're going through times like this, and we get caught up in all that's going on in our minds, we want to push that out to God as if once it's out, it's gone, and we don't have to worry about it. But the reality is we're still holding on to that. Those same thoughts, those same fears, those same anxieties are still floating around in our head and creating stress and concern for us. For the early followers of Jesus Christ, they were able to be with them and to give Him their concerns, and He was able to interact with them. But ever since then, we have relied on what Jesus said. He said, I'm going to be with the Father, but I'm going to send the Spirit back to be with you. And they called the Spirit at that point the Comforter, the one who comes alongside and brings comfort. And so I want to talk just a little bit about that. How do we connect with the Spirit during this time? Many years ago, as I said, as I was going through some difficult times, I realized that my number one job in life was not being a great dad or being a great employee or being a great son or being a great business owner or being a great pastor, or any of others things. My number one job in life was simply to align my spirit with God's spirit. That on a daily basis, my number one job was to align my spirit with God's spirit. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but I want to share a couple of things that I learned about how to effectively do that have made a difference in my life, and hopefully they'll make a difference in your life as we navigate these challenging waters with all of the distractions and all of the anxieties that come with that. I was reading through some books about Christian meditation, trying to learn exactly what that meant, because quite honestly, having grown up in the church, the terms meditation didn't have a lot of clarity to me. I didn't know if that just meant being off and praying. There were other forms of meditation that I heard about and learned about, but they were associated with other religions than just Christianity. And so I began to dive into that and learn. And one of the first things that I was taught, which made sense to me and worked very well for me, was to take something that Jesus had given his disciples as a way to connect with God and to use that for myself. It's actually something that Pastor Robert talked about not too many weeks ago, and that is the Lord's Prayer. Now again, I just mentioned that it's not about just saying things and offering things to God as far as it's concerned, but how do you actually meditate? How do you actually calm your mind and focus your spirit to where it calms down enough to where your spirit and God's spirit can begin to align, and you can find that peace that comes from being in alignment with Him. And so what I learned was simply to take the Lord's Prayer, something that most of us know by memory, to where we can just kind of pop through that, but to take one single word at a time, to get into a quiet place where we're by ourselves, where we can focus, where we got all of the noise turned off from life. And I know for some of you, that's easy. That's your house all the time. And then for others of you, it's like never your house. But find a place and a time where you can be alone, where things can be quiet. Take a few moments just to take some deep breaths and to let some of the anxiety go that you're feeling in your body. And as you take those deep breaths, just begin to try and focus on what you know of the Lord's Prayer. And beginning with the very first word, our. And say that to yourself over and over again. Our. And breathe out as you do it. Our. Our. And focus on that word. Of all of that it means, experience that word, our, that we are all in this together, that our Father. And then move to the next word. Father. Father. As many times as you need to. And then when you get to where you're starting to get distracted from that word, you move on to the next. Our Father, who? And then as you work your way through this, begin to move more and more slowly from word to word, taking deep breaths all the way through. And as you work through this, one of the things you'll discover is that in those silent times from one word to the next, from heaven to the next word, there's this little bit of a gap, this little bit of a pause, where there's silence, not just in the world, but in your head and even in your spirit. And it's through slowing those down and bringing those gaps in between the words that we truly begin to meditate on God and on the Spirit of God. There are others who do this by reading the Psalms and taking time just to let that work within them. And there's other ways as well, through prayer and silence and meditation. But the main thing that I want to encourage you as we talk today is that sense of connecting to God and allowing God to use our minds in the way that He created them is important. Because the reality is God did design us. He wired us. We were created to become alert and aware of potential things that might bring danger to us. He designed us to where when you're sitting at a table and something moves out of the corner of your eye, that all your attention focuses on it. He designed you to where when bad news comes, that your blood pressure and your anxiety and your adrenaline kick in. He designed all of that. So it's very important that we learn how to not let our minds be used to make us aware and alert, but we also learn how to use our minds to slow ourselves down and to be able to align our spirit with God's Spirit through praying things like the Lord's Prayer, through reading through the Psalms where you can see just how God has done amazing things, or simply just finding times to sit in silence and look at all of God's creation off before us. But it is an important thing that right now, that as the world is going through so many different things, and as you may be going through different things in your life on top of that, that we find ways for people to see that as the people of God, there is a difference in our life. It's not that we're not running to the store to get the things we need, but that there's a sense of inner peace that we have found through focusing on aligning our spirit with God's Spirit that allows us to have confidence that even though things may be hectic, even though things may be scary, even though things may be really, really bad, that we have a faith in a God that transcends all of this and is able to bring us peace as we sit in silence and focus on God's presence in our lives.